Hey guys, and welcome back. So today we are discussing the solved case of the Breda family, who were a pretty normal, albeit very well-off family that actually used to live here in Perth before returning home, where the following tragic events unfolded. And this case has left me feeling very confused because of the, I guess because of the age and identity of the killer. But anyway, we'll get into all the details in just a moment. And by the way, if you want to listen to this video on the go, I do have it available in a podcast format. It is called Koala Crimes. I'll leave it all down below. But before we get into it, I do want to thank today's sponsor, and that is June's Journey. So June's Journey is a hidden object mystery mobile phone game where you follow along with the main character June and help her to solve a murder mystery along with a few other mysteries along the way. Part of the game also allows you to do a little bit of a DIY on your island and your estate. You can add things like furniture and plants and just make it your own little space, which is really fun. And I find this game really great when I want to get on my phone and relax, but not mindlessly scroll through social media, which I think we all know isn't always the best use of our time. I like finding the hidden objects on the screen. It's a bit of a challenge and it keeps my mind moving as well. And basically, the faster you find the objects, the higher your score and the more of the story that unfolds. So if you like a challenge, you're really going to like this game. You can download June's Journey for free from the link in my description. It's also available on Android, iOS, and also on PC through Facebook Games. And having said all of that, let's get into today's video. So let's start by discussing this family of five. We have the father, 54-year-old Martin Breda, who was a successful and a hard-working businessman that held a position as a managing director of the Australian branch of Engel and Volkers. I've probably mispronounced that, because it is a German-owned real estate company, and if you guys are not new around here, you know my pronunciation of anything sucks. I also do believe that Martin actually had many other business ventures and projects, which is why the Breda family was so well off and Martin was considered such a successful businessman. Then we have 55-year-old Teresa, who worked in banking, and their three children. We have the youngest, Marley, who was 16, 20-year-old Henry, and the oldest, 22-year-old Rudy. The Breda family was well known and well liked in their community and overall considered good people who contributed to society. They were a successful family, the kids were very smart, and they appeared from the outside to be incredibly close-knit. The Breda family were actually originally from South Africa, but they moved to Australia due to Martin's work. They spent about 8 years total here, I think spending most of it here in Perth. That is where the children attended high school, and then they moved over to the Sunshine Coast for a little while before deciding to return back to South Africa. But it actually was only Martin, Teresa, and Marley, the youngest, who went back home, leaving behind Henry and Rudy because they were attending the University of Melbourne, or I think it's Melbourne University? No, University of Melbourne, which I do believe is actually one of Australia's, if not the top university in Australia. So if that's not a testament to how smart these two brothers were, then I don't know what is. And they were actually studying some really top-notch subjects. Henry was studying physics and Rudy was doing a Master's of Engineering. So I'm thinking anyone studying those subjects has some serious brains on them. And I know this isn't technically an Australian true crime, but as the family spent 8 years here, we're just going to roll with it for today. Anyway, back in South Africa, Teresa, Martin and Marley found a new home in Stellenbosch, which is a university town that is near Cape Town. So I personally hadn't heard of Stellenbosch before, so of course I looked it up and oh my god, this place looks beautiful. I've never been to South Africa. I would love to go. I'm Oh my gosh, I love a South African accent. I think it just sounds so beautiful and so soothing. And truly, Google Stellenbosch, because from what I can tell, it's just greenery and mountains, and it's just so picturesque and looks like this gorgeous, quaint little town. If you have been to Stellenbosch, comment below, or if you happen to be from Stellenbosch. I love the name, Stellenbosch. But anyway, comment below if you're from that general area or have visited there. Let me know if I'm sort of right on my analysis of just how stunning this place is. Anyway, in Stellenbosch, the Van Breda family moved into a 2-story home in the very exclusive De Zolza Golf Estate, which was or is a gated community with incredibly high security. Think electric fences, CCTV, on-site 24-hour, 7-day-a-week security, just to name a few of the security measures that this estate had in place. And from my understanding, De Zolza is actually one of the safest places to live in South Africa, albeit probably one of the most expensive by the sounds of it and by looking at it. But if you can swing it, I imagine it's an incredible place to live. And also, I do believe that South Africa is not necessarily the safest place to live. Obviously, again, I haven't been there, I'm not from there. And I feel like not doing like Aussie-based true crime, I'm a little out of my depth when it comes to being able to really tell you guys about the location that we're discussing today. So again, if you are from South Africa, maybe let us know in the comments below, like your thoughts on this. Because again, I believe it's a beautiful country, but I don't believe it's necessarily the safest place, which may be why the Van Breda family decided to live in such a high security place. I mean, they could afford it, but they potentially also needed to live there for their own safety. And it was also the fact that the place they lived, De Zolza, oh my gosh, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, but the fact that this place was such a high security place in Stellenbosch, which I believe again is probably or is potentially quite an expensive place to live. All of that makes this crime even more shocking. By the way, I'm kind of rapidly losing light outside, so I do apologize if this video gets a little dark. But anyway, let's fast forward to the evening of January 26, 2015. The Van Breda family were all home in South Africa in Stellenbosch, including Rudy and Henry, who are both home from uni for uni break, I assume, being January and all. And by all accounts, it was a really normal night. Rudy went for a jog around the estate. Marley was curled up reading a book. The family all had dinner together, and then later in the evening, a couple of them watched Star Trek. I don't know what the correct... No, Star Trek, that sounds right. Anyway, not relevant to the story, they watched a movie in the evening before all heading to bed or to their bedrooms at about 11 or 12 that night. Except for Henry, who was up on his computer. So in the early hours of January 27, Henry gets up from his computer to use the bathroom, and while in the bathroom, he hears this banging outside. So he opens the bathroom door to peer out and see what's going on, and he looks into the bedroom that he shares with his brother Rudy, and that's when he sees his brother being attacked by this figure that he doesn't recognize. Henry is frozen with fear, however, and doesn't go to assist his brother, but instead calls out for his father, Martin. And of course, Martin comes running to see what's going on, and this is when Martin is also attacked. Again, Henry is too scared to intervene, which I guess I can understand. You kind of go into this fight or flight mode in these situations, and he was shit scared, basically. And he would also later describe the attacker as a tall, axe-wielding black man wearing dark clothes, gloves, and a balaclava. Strangely, this intruder doesn't seem particularly fazed by Henry's presence, despite the fact that Henry did make himself known when he called out for his father for help. His mother, Teresa, soon enters the bedroom, and she is also attacked on the balcony of the room. And lastly, Marley is also attacked in the bedroom. But Henry doesn't actually witness his sister and mother's attacks, and all 4 family members are savagely beaten and attacked with this axe, with Henry saying that this intruder was actually laughing during these attacks, which is incredibly disturbing. After the attacks, the intruder fled the bedroom and headed downstairs, and this is when Henry heard what he thought was a second intruder downstairs. He said he heard like bickering or arguing between 2 people, and this is when he decided to make his move, even though he had been frozen scared for the entire time that his family had been attacked and had not tried to intervene. So Henry decides he's going to chase these attackers off, despite the fact that there is now potentially 2 of them. But of course, as he tries to, run and scare them away, one of them does come at him, and it turns out that they have a knife and they begin slashing at Henry, and he does end up with a few cuts on his body. But it's during this scuffle that Henry does manage to grab the axe off of the intruder and throws it at him, causing the intruder or intruders, I don't think he ever really figured out if there was 1 or 2, but let's, just say there was 2. The attackers flee out the kitchen door, leaving it wide open. I'm not sure if this scuffle happened upstairs or downstairs, but regardless, after Henry throws the axe at them, they flee through the kitchen door and leave the kitchen door wide open. And for some reason, Henry also does not close or lock this kitchen door, which would be my first instinct, because of course they're now gone. I want to try to make the place as safe as I can and hope to God that there's no other intruders in the house, but he doesn't do this. Instead, he phones his girlfriend, 16-year-old Bianca, who doesn't pick up. And this is when he decides to head back upstairs where the attacks happened, but before he can do so, he actually passes out from shock on the stairs and does not wake up for approximately 3 hours. When he does wake up, it's around 7 a.m. and, he sort of wakes up and realizes what's happened and decides to phone emergency services, but he Googles the number. Like, who doesn't know their local emergency service number, whether that is 000 or 911? It's like literally the first thing we're taught as a child. We don't need to look it up. It doesn't matter what kind of traumatic experience I was going through. The numbers 000 are burnt into my brain. But anyway, give him the benefit of the doubt. Assume he, for some reason, forgot. He Googled it, he phoned them, and he was on this call to emergency services for 25 minutes. We are going to discuss this call in more detail later in the video, but I will play you a snippet now just to give you an idea of the tone of the call.
Stephen, what is your emergency?
I need an ambulance. Lots of.
Are there any suspects on scene?
No, they ran away.
With what were they attacked?
An axe. It was. I think I blacked out and I've just woken up.
12 Hosker Street.
Yes,
Hosker
absolutely.
is in Boertesig, Milnerton, eh? And you're saying you're out in Stellenbosch.
Yes.
Listen to me. Are you picking up an address on that number that I'm giving you? What area in Stellenbosch is it? Desaltse.
Yeah, Desaltse Golf Estate.
Desaltse.
Send it to number 10 Alamon Street. You have to go past my street to get to 10 Alamon Street. I'll be out in the road.
It's also worth noting that Henry didn't reach out to any of his neighbours or to the estate security, despite how long this emergency call was taking him. Nor did he make any attempt to check on, help or revive any of his family members, despite the fact that he would later admit to hearing his sister gurgling, which would suggest that she may be alive. And when emergency services finally did arrive, they were really surprised at how calm Henry's demeanour was, considering what he had just gone through. And I understand that everybody does react differently to trauma, but his demeanor was truly remarkable. So I am about to go into some of the details of the crime scene, and as you can imagine, they are pretty horrific. As emergency services entered the premise, they said that they could smell blood. And when I read this, I have to admit, I didn't even know that blood had any sort of scent or smell, but I guess when there is that much of it, you can smell it. And a lot of them would also go on to say that this was one of the worst crime scenes that they had ever attended in their careers. A paramedic also later stated that blood was running down the stairs like a waterfall. Upstairs near the body, the murder weapon, the 4.5 kilo axe, was located, as well as the knife that had been used to slash Henry during the scuffle with the intruder. And Martin, Teresa, and Rudy were all pronounced dead at the scene, all three of them having bled out. It was evident, however, that this family had fought for their lives. Both Teresa and Rudy had defensive wounds on their hands. Martin didn't, however, which would indicate that he was attacked from behind. And the level of violence used in these attacks was not only evident by, of course, the amount of blood at the crime scene, but just on first glance at these bodies. Again, of course, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but just by looking at the head injuries, you could see protruding bone fragments and brain tissue. That was very visible to the naked eye. So whoever had committed these crimes was very, very angry. However, when paramedics got to Marley, they realized that she was, by some miracle, alive. Like, barely, but she was clinging to life. Marley, of course, also had some incredibly serious injuries, including head injuries as well as a severed jugular vein. She was immediately transferred to the intensive care unit, where she would spend the next several months in recovery and receive a lot of treatments and a lot of surgeries, including a brain surgery. And Marley's defensive wounds were a huge testament to just how hard this girl fought for somebody that is just a baby, just 16 years old. She had truly fought for her life and survived, which is the one miracle to come out of this entire tragic story. Tragically, it would be discovered that Rudy had also been alive for about 3 hours after the attacks, meaning that if an ambulance had been called straight away, so if Henry had not passed out, Rudy also would have potentially survived. And Henry's injuries just included a few minor cuts which were caused by the knife. And I would include these images, and I will try to include them, but YouTube flags anything that is blood related. Even a little splattering of blood in a photo, a little cut, they're like, no. A paper cut, absolutely not. I'll try to blur them out just so you get an idea of just how minor his cuts are. They're not graphic images or anything, but you can very easily Google them if you want to see them for yourself. Again, with the crime scene photos, they are available, but I don't know if I'd want to include them anyway, to be honest, because it's just horrific. Upon examination of the crime scene, the police established that both the weapons, the axe and the knife, had actually originated from the Van Breda residence. And they also established that there had been no forced entry, which was incredibly bizarre given how high security this estate was, as I mentioned earlier. Nor was there really any sign at all that anyone had entered the premise that evening. Nothing was caught on CCTV, the security didn't see anything, no alarms were triggered. So had the intruder come from inside of the estate, or was it somebody that was so familiar with the estate that they were capable of dodging all the security measures that were in place? It's also worth noting that absolutely nothing was stolen from the home. And these intruders, considering they got as far as getting in the home could have very easily taken a lot, considering everybody was upstairs asleep except for Henry, who was awake, and all the valuables were actually downstairs, yet nothing was taken. And you'd think if you got so far as to get into such a luxurious estate that you would take something of value, but nothing was taken. Or perhaps it was a robbery gone wrong. After all, that would explain why the weapons came from inside the household. After all, what killers are coming to a home with the intent to kill and not bringing any weapons? But then again, what petty thieves use such levels of brutality? But either way, what was the motive? There was no clear reason why anybody would want this family dead, except for the fact that they were very wealthy, and then where they lived was certainly not an easy target for a robbery. I mean, if it was just a random robbery, then this is not the place that you're going to target. You're not going to target the most high security state in South Africa. As you can tell, there was a heck of a lot not adding up about this crime. It had a lot of people scratching their heads and wondering what the heck. Oh, and also there was no foreign footprints found in the home, and given the level of blood there was, this seems near impossible. So either a ghost killed the Van Breda family, or there's a more simple and logical explanation. Unfortunately, Marley would later be diagnosed with retrograde amnesia, meaning that she had zero recollection of the attacks or who her attackers were, although I guess there's a good and a bad side to this. You know, the bad is obviously she can't help the police with the investigation, but the good is that she doesn't have the memory of the attacks burned into her brain. But anyway, Marley did actually return to school and attempt to resume her normal life, which was great, but she was kept separate from her brother Henry. I do believe they were allowed to be in contact, but different sources did say different things, but they were both staying with members of their family. As you can imagine, this was a case that shocked South Africa. It made headlines not only in South Africa, but around the world. And it really was a case with huge public interest, especially when we get to the trial, which of course we'll discuss later. But it was just one of those cases where there was a lot of questions, like why would somebody attack such a well-liked and well-respected family, and not to mention attacking the kids as well, like these innocent victims, and not to mention how did the intruder get into this high security estate. It was one of those, it really was a murder mystery at the time in the media, which, people love, I guess. So several months after the murders, rumours did begin to swell that perhaps Henry had a little something to do with his family's killings, because apparently his parents had cut off his allowance, and by cutting off his allowance, they cut off his access to the drug tick or meth. Of course, keep in mind, Henry was just 20 at the time of the killings, and killing your entire family seems like a real overreaction for an allowance being cut off. However, and don't quote me because I'm no expert, but I do believe meth is a heck of a drug and can have a heck of an effect on the human brain, including bouts of anger. No expert, this is just what I am aware of. And these addiction rumours were further fueled when word got out that Henry had allegedly been in some fancy rehab centre in Cape Town. And it's also around this time that Henry's alleged drug dealer, he came forward and said that Henry was a client of his. But despite all of these rumours, Henry continued living his life, he cooperated with the police, and he maintained his innocence. And even during this time, he did drop out of university, but he enrolled in a cooking school where he met his new girlfriend, Danielle Janse van Rensburg, whom had no idea who Henry was when she met him, until she stumbled upon his family's story online. Danielle, who said she felt heartbroken for Henry when she found out what he had been through, supported him during this time and also continued to support him as his family's investigation continued. 18 months after the murders of the Van Breda family, Henry was informed through his lawyer of his impending arrest for the murder and attempted murder of his family, and was advised to hand himself in before he was arrested, which he did in June of 2016. And as you can imagine, Marley was incredibly distressed to hear of her brother's arrest over her family's murders. The following day, Henry appeared in court and was charged with 3 counts of murder and 1 of attempted, as well as 1 of obstruction of justice. But he was released on bail almost immediately under the conditions that he report to the police on the regular and not leave the Western Cape. Several months later, however, Henry and his girlfriend Danielle managed to get themselves in some trouble when they were arrested over cannabis possession, but this turned into basically nothing, no charges were laid, and they were released on bail. So now we're going to go through the main evidence that led to the arrest of Henry Van Breda. Firstly, on the night of the murder, he was wearing some bed shorts or boxer shorts and some socks. And these shorts and socks had blood spatter on them. They were examined, they were tested, and this blood was blood from his family. The thing was, though, Henry said that when the attacks happened, he was standing in the bathroom, and where he showed the police investigators where he was standing in the bathroom and where his family was actually attacked, there's no way he could have got that blood spatter on them. There is some, there's a lot of science behind blood spatter. Clearly, I don't know it. I'm not an expert. I'm not a forensic anything. I'm just someone with an interest in true crime. But there is a way to tell that if you are standing near someone and you're stabbing them and you get blood spatter on you, they can tell where you were standing when it happened. And they could tell that Henry was in close proximity to his family when they were attacked. So either he was lying about where he was standing or he was the killer. I hope I explained that correctly. I think you guys will understand what I'm saying. And then there is the 3-hour gap in which Henry didn't phone emergency services because he said he passed out from shock. The thing is, though, experts say that when you pass out from shock, you only pass out for a couple of minutes. You don't pass out for 3 hours. So they do believe that in this 3 hours, Henry used this as time to tamper with evidence and tamper with the crime scene, which is why he has also been charged with obstruction of justice, lying to police, tampering with evidence, tampering with the crime scene. I will add, though, that Henry was actually diagnosed with epilepsy, and he would later claim that he had a seizure instead of passing out from shock. So I guess it is possible. But let's move on to the other evidence, because with all the other facts in this case, I think we can safely say that he was awake for those 3 hours. And then we have the cuts that were on Henry's body, the ones that he said were inflicted during the scuffle with the intruder. Basically, these cuts were very neat, very straight, and nothing like the injuries that were inflicted on the rest of his family. The cuts were too perfect and almost certainly self-inflicted. And then we have the fact that he didn't step in during the attacks to help out any of his family, but when he thought there was 2 intruders in the house, that's when he decided to step up and chase them off and get in a scuffle with one of them. So that just doesn't make sense at all. And then, of course, both these attackers decide to flee, apparently, leaving Henry alive and unharmed, as if there was 2 attackers, even if there was 1 attacker, as if they wouldn't stay and try to kill Henry so there was no witnesses left. It makes no sense that Henry, with no weapons on him, tries to scare them off and they both run away. It's just, his version of events don't add up. And as I mentioned earlier, they fled out of the kitchen door, and Henry doesn't try to close or lock the door and keep himself safe. which would be the first thing that I would do. If I had an intruder in my house and they fled and I was inside and safe and alive, I would shut and lock that door so goddamn fast. And then, of course, as I've mentioned a few times, this estate was a high security estate. There's just literally no way that somebody got in and out of that estate without being detected. There's just not. The person had to have come from inside the estate, and that person really has to be Henry. Now let's go back to this very strange emergency services phone call that lasted for 25 minutes. Again, I'll play you a snippet and then we'll talk about it because it's very bizarre. And listen out for the point where he says, unconscious and bleeding from the head, ha ha.
Okay, what kind of injuries is there?
My family and we were attacked by a guy with an axe.
What's an axe? Okay, unconscious, it is. Unconscious, huh?
Yes, and bleeding from the head.
So Henry sounds as calm as heck in this call, as though he was just ringing up Domino's to order a pizza or something. Aside from a bit of nervous stuttering, which Henry did say he had a stutter in school, he's completely calm, completely together, not panicking, not freaking out, not crying, which if you had witnessed your family be murdered, I wouldn't think you would be this calm. And then I don't think you would even be, I mean, you could be nervous laughing, but it's just not a very normal reaction. It's very strange. And then Henry struggles to even direct them to the right residence. Maybe he didn't know how to describe how to get to this estate, but he basically ends up directing them to a nearby street, which is where he meets the emergency services. And the crazy thing is, the operator, whose name was Janine, described the call as the weirdest ever. She literally thought this was a prank phone call. That's how strange this very long call was. Having said that, again, if you listen to the entire call, which is available on YouTube, it's, I guess because she thought it was a prank, she wasn't like doing the best job ever. I'm not blaming her, obviously, but like she didn't do the best job because she thought it was a prank phone call. But yeah, all in all, incredibly bizarre and incredibly strange. So this trial starts in April of 2017 with Henry Van Breda entering a plea of not guilty. And just to give you an idea of how huge in the media this case or this trial was, it was very much compared to the infamous Oscar Pistorius case of 2014. If you don't know the Oscar Pistorius case, sheesh, it's worth looking up. I remember that case being in the media for what felt like forever. But anyway, so Henry's lawyer, he had a heck of a job because a lot of evidence pointed towards the fact that Henry was guilty, despite the fact that Henry maintained his innocence. Like, I think he almost would have been better off pleading guilty and showing some remorse, but I'm not a lawyer, so what would I know? But basically his lawyer did try to argue the fact that he was young, he was 20 years old, and he had no previous convictions, and all of these facts should be taken into account. And also during the trial, for some reason, Henry was allowed to take the stand, which seems like a terrible idea because he managed to contradict himself quite a lot. The only other person that was there and survived, Marley, was unfortunately not able to testify, of course, due to her retrograde amnesia. I'm getting very tongue-tied towards the end of this video. I would say it's probably for the best given her age, how young she was, trying to keep her out of this entire case and trial as much as possible. In May of 2018, Henry Van Breda was found guilty on 3 counts of murder, 1 of attempted murder and 1 of obstructing the course of justice. His girlfriend, Danielle, who I mentioned earlier, was present during the trial. She completely supported Henry throughout, and she was seen crying as this verdict was read out. And as Henry was actually led away from the courthouse after the verdict, he blew kisses to his girlfriend. Now, as far as I can tell, she very much still believes that Henry is innocent. She has done interviews where she does talk about why, and I couldn't find any super recent updates, so this is going from a couple of years ago. I couldn't find any recent articles where she discusses Henry. Unsurprisingly, I'm sure she doesn't want to keep talking about this, but I do in a way feel sorry for Danielle. She's obviously very much in love with her boyfriend. I would guess, and I'm no expert, but I would guess that Henry is a psychopath. And the one thing about psychopaths is that they're very good at hiding that they're psychopaths. So Danielle has seen just this one side of Henry, this soft, loving, caring side. And that's all she has to go off, the way he treated her, which sounds like he treated her well. So can we blame her? No, we can't. She was in love, or is in love. She had obviously been manipulated, but at the very least, I guess we can say at least he is safely behind bars, and that means that she is also safe. I'm sure she doesn't see it that way, but that's how I see it. So the judge did state, quote, "We have no explanation for what you did. You have no remorse. No substantial and compelling circumstances have been placed before us. There appear to be none." And perhaps this is the most frustrating thing about this case for me. There seems to be no real motive. There has never been any explanation for his actions. Of course, Henry still to this day says that he is innocent. And what in the world compels a 20-year-old boy to murder his entire family, his parents, his siblings, or attempted, for one of them? Was it for money, for revenge? Is he actually a psychopath? I don't have the answers, and neither does anybody else. Or was it to do with his drug problem that he allegedly had? I can only assume he doesn't have any remorse because he's never admitted guilt, and I feel like if you had some level of remorse, you would admit to what you had done. In June of that year, Henry was sentenced to 3 life terms, 15 years for attempted murder and 12 for obstruction of justice. And as far as I'm aware, he's never been diagnosed with any mental health issues either, none that have been publicly stated. And of course, as every killer always does, Henry Van Breda did appeal, and this appeal was swiftly denied. But that is all for today's video. Again, I do want to thank our sponsor, June's Journey. The link will be below in the description to download the game for free, so please check that out. But let me know your thoughts down below on today's case. I will be very interested to hear what you have to say. And until next time, stay vigilant and stay safe.